So this is something I think is universal, and it's different for everybody, but just right off the top, I think everybody mostly agrees with this, at least in some area of your life, and it's this, that winning is better than not winning. Now, people take it to different extremes, and we'll talk about that, but just in life or certain segments of your life, it's just better to win and not lose. And so here's all my cards on the table. I am hyper competitive. And there's certain areas I don't care, and then others where it's a little off the rails. It's probably my obsession with the Bucks and football is a little bit unhealthy. And in fact, several weeks ago, I was watching the Bucks play the Dallas Cowboys, and my nephew was with me watching the game. And at the end, he's like, "I have never seen you like that before." Because I hate the Cowboys. And if you're a fan of the Cowboys, I don't hate you, but I just feel it. And now I got 3 boys, and specifically 2 older ones. They hate to lose as much as I do, which has created tension in our home because, this is what my dad did with me, and I don't know if it works, but I'm repeating the same kind of parenting style, and that is I won't let them win. So there is tension around the fact that I won't let them win at Madden 25, and they don't want to play me on Xbox. The other thing is, unashamedly, I will back them down in the post playing basketball until they get taller, because they're the only people I can back down in the post. And I just won't let them win. And my dad would do this. I don't know if you ever watch these, no offense, old people that just do hook shots until they're 90 and they can just beat you with a hook shot. You know what I'm talking about? My dad did that relentlessly and beat me until I could finally somehow beat him with his old man hook shot. And so I'm doing the same thing. I don't know if it works, so get back with me in 10 years. But I'm not going to let them win. I don't apologize for it. But I like to be good at whatever I'm doing. In fact, this is how early this started. I remember in 6th grade, I went out for the soccer team, not because I didn't know anything about soccer, didn't even know the rules. I just knew I could make the team, and I wanted to play something. And so I made the team, and I hustled, but I was terrible. And I'll never forget getting to the end of the year, they gave out trophies and participation trophies to everybody. And as a 6th grader, I got angry. I threw my trophy away. I was like, I don't deserve a trophy. I'm terrible. Why did everybody get a trophy? So it's always been in me, and I was like, what's wrong with me? And then the Enneagram came along, and I just realized I'm a 3. And so it's just kind of part of it. It's part of how I'm wired. The other thing that I hate to do is just when I'm not good at something and people invite me every once in a while to these charity golf things, or I'm in a network of churches that we're a part of, and all these guys that I'm friends with, and they all play golf. And I never want to do it because I play twice a year. I'm terrible. And so if I want to feel bad about myself, there are less expensive, less time-consuming ways to do that. I just want to be good. So it's just a thing in me. Others of you have the same thing, but the reality is winning is better than winning, or winning is better than not winning. And what I want to talk about today is winning, regardless of what your Enneagram is. Some of you are like, oh, I don't really care. But in some areas of your life, you do. Some of you are on if I can't win, I'm not even going to try because I got to be good at it when I start. Others of you, winning is everything, so you'll try anything. But in the right context, winning is better than not winning. Now, there is a context where winning is not appropriate. In fact, I did a whole series on that I think Christians should pay more attention to. But in the areas of life or the arena of life that matters most, it's important. And the arena that matters most to you is your life, your relationships, your future. What at the end, regardless of all the urgent that's pressing in around you now, at the end, what's going to matter to you? Winning in the areas that are most important to you in your life is a big deal, which leads me to a question that I want to talk about for a few minutes today. And here's the thing, if you don't ask this question, you'll end up doing what Solomon talked about in the Old Testament when he said that if you live kind of directionless, or you just adopt everybody else's thing, or you never really consider the question I'm going to ask, you will live chasing the wind. You'll never be able to catch it. You won't really know what the finish line is. You'll end up at the end of a season where you thought you were winning and you actually weren't winning. And in some cases, you were undermining your own future and your own success. He's like, you'll just chase the wind. And I'm just telling you, there's a question that most people never ask. They just don't ask it. And consequently, they never answer it. And so they end up, in some cases, in a place they don't want to, because if you don't answer it, here's what will happen inevitably. Life will become a race, and you will feel the pressure to compete, and you won't really know the finish line. In fact, in some cases, you'll start off, and in certain areas of your life, marriage or finances, your kids or your career thing, the finish line will move, and it'll never be clear to you. Or life will begin to feel like it's a game, and you will feel the pressure to compete because you're a human being, but you won't really know what the rules are. And the problem is when we live like that, live kind of aimlessly, live chasing the wind. And yeah, like there's things that I want to be successful at and people I want to love well. But if you haven't really honed in, if you haven't really identified it, you end up moving through seasons creating avoidable regret that you didn't have to accumulate because you really didn't know where you were going. You're just chasing the wind. You were doing what felt really great in that season that didn't feel great in the next season. So here's my really simple question that I want to challenge you to ask as you start this new year. And the question is this: what's the win? Like, what's the win for you? And not just in terms of life in general. I'm talking about in specific areas of your life, the areas that matter most, that are most important. What's your win? And because here's the thing. If you don't have a definable win, you don't know when you're winning. And that's one of the really difficult things with life. So as you look at the major categories of your life, financially, relationally, your career, your academic progress, your marriage, heck, emotionally, spiritually, in each of those categories of your life that you would say, regardless of your faith background, it's a big deal, and it's gonna be a big deal later in my life. What is your win? What's your win for your life and for your future? Because I'm just telling you, in the areas that matter most people never define the win. And what happens when you don't define the win is that somebody else will define it for you. So you will end up adopting the win of cultural majority thinking, or you'll accidentally adopt the win of just the people around you or your in-laws or the pressure that you feel over here. And the pressure in culture is so great, but if you don't define it for you, somebody else is gonna define the win. And you'll just end up like everybody else. You'll date like everybody else. You'll handle your finances like everybody else, your money like everybody else. You'll end up parenting on autopilot where you parent like your parents parented, which maybe is great. Or you will try to avoid how your parents parented and that becomes your win. I would call it a not goal. And I just tell you, not goals are not enough. Here's what I mean by not goal. Like, I'm not going to be like them. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to repeat the patterns of my mom. I'm not going to do what my dad did. And a not goal, I mean, it could be a good goal, but it's not enough. Because if all you have is not goals of what you're not gonna be and what you're not gonna repeat, you will feel the incessant pressure to compare yourself and to compete for the rest of your life. A not goal is not, so what's your win? What is your win in the areas of your life that matters most in this season and in the next season and the season after that? When I was in my 20s, I read this book that I still have on my shelf, I think, somewhere. And it was kind of defining for me because at that point in my life, you're just kind of trying to figure stuff out. And the advice in this book was so incredible. It basically encouraged you, and this ended up being a mentor of mine that wrote the book, but encouraged you to basically pick words that you wanted to define you toward the end of your life. Like literally think about, okay, because we spent so much of our time jumping at the urgent, what we gotta do, what we gotta take care of with our kids, trying to get through school, trying to get a job, trying to make sure that we feel successful, whatever the thing is. Nobody has enough time, everybody's overwhelmed. So they encourage you, okay, but who are you becoming? Like, who do you want to be later on in life? And so I literally kind of defined, about 7 or 8 words of what I wanted to become. And I actually put them in a journal and I pull that over to another journal every single year to keep that as like the bullseye on my target with all the stuff going on in life. This is who I want to become. In fact, this is going to seem weird to some of you, so I'm not suggesting you do this. But I even had another mentor encourage me at some point to write, this is going to sound morbid, but write my own obituary. And right now I'm doing fine, but to write my own obituary, and I did this quite a few years ago, to where I just listed out because it is so easy to get consumed with the here and now, get consumed with pursuits, get consumed with, I gotta save more, I gotta whatever more, I've gotta upgrade more. And yet I've said this so many times, I have the fortunate and sometimes unfortunate opportunity to be with so many people at the end of their life, and nobody is talking about most of the stuff that consumes our time. Sorry to tell you, nobody is asking about your kid's GPA at the end. Nobody cares. Nobody cares you got a gold watch after 30 years of service at whatever. Nobody cares about your degrees. Nobody cares about the market share. They just don't care. And I'm not saying that it's meaningless, but like, who do you want to become? Where do you want to end up as a person? It is unbelievably clarifying, unbelievably defining for your life and then ultimately your decisions. So here's a couple examples, and these aren't personal, this is for our family, but just to get you thinking in terms of clarifying and defining the win. And this should be somewhat broad, but specific enough where it creates guardrails to when you're not hitting it, there's something you need to pay attention to. The writer of Proverbs says, the prudent see danger and take refuge, and the simple just keep going and they suffer for it. They keep making the same decisions and they pray and hope their way into a better future, never actually create a win around that, and then they end up down the road suffering for the fact they never clarified where they actually wanted to end up. And so here's a couple for us, just as examples. The first one was for our marriage. The win is coming up. And you're gonna see it. To always want to be where the other person is. And this is specifically for my wife and I, not like codependency, but just a simple question to my wife. Do you still want me to come home? Like, do you still get excited? Or when you hear the garage door go up, is there an angst of like, here he is again? Like, it's an important question. The other question is for her to me, basically, I love work, but I love my family, love my kids. Do you still love to come home to your family more than you love being at work? And I'll tell you why we created this, and it's somewhat broad, but the reason is because before we were married, we heard so many people trying to give us advice, and they're like, well, we just make it work. We're like, well, we kind of want more than a make it work marriage. And so 15 years in, this has been a guiding kind of principle for us of just, if we're just making it work, and say there's some seasons where you gotta just make it work, and that's better than not making it work. But my point is, do you have this? Another win is this for us, specifically at our children. We wanted to have children who'd want to be with one another and with us when they no longer have to be. And I grew up with this and saw the benefits of this. And you can't control all of this, but I'm telling you, this win has guided us in so much of our discipline and parenting and what we say no to and what we say yes to, that eventually our kids would actually want to be with one another and still would want to hang with us when they don't have to anymore. And specifically, we saw so many Christian parents undermine their relationship with their kids, and we didn't want to do that. Third one is that the win would be to create a life where the marginalized and hurting feel at home with our family. And again, I'm not saying that's your win, but when you create wins in categories that matter for your life, this has directed how we spend our money. This has directed who we've invited into our home, what relationships we prioritize, because we wanted this to be true of us. And then the last one, I added this one at the last minute, but this has been a massive guiding win for us, is to live unhurried and with margin in our daily lives. And there's more than this, but the reason I wanted to highlight this is because I feel like increasingly in our culture, this is becoming so unrealistic for so many people, that this is like the gold at the end of the rainbow. It's not possible. You can't do it. And I'm just telling you, you need to decide what your win is before the cultural majority thinking around you decides what the win is. And so for us, we just decided when we are, yes, there's going to be hurry. We're raising 4 kids and they're crazy and chaotic. There's gonna be hurry, there's gonna be stress at times, but if we find that the rhythm of our life consistently is just hurry, 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 overwhelmed with stress, no margin of time, no matter what our kids are achieving or how well we think we're doing or everybody else thinks we're doing, for us, it is a blinking red light on the dashboard that we feel like we're losing at life. And the reason is because we've created a win around where we wanna be in the next couple decades. And you have to, for this one specifically, you have to be willing to do some things that nobody else is doing, experience a little FOMO, a little bit, we're kind of crazy, but we're gonna do it anyway, because we have not been created, regardless of what culture tells you, to live over-hurried, over-stressed, anxious with no margin of time. And so what is your win? So my point is just this, you don't have to adopt my wins. But my point is that even if you're not a follower of Jesus, this will help you, and my hope is that you would eventually maybe cross the line of faith to follow Jesus. But if you're a follower of Jesus, it's a big deal. And faith, no faith, you should decide in the areas that are most important to you what your win is for the future. So in the New Testament, I want to look at one win statement that came from somebody that you can't overestimate, changed our lives and our culture in ways that we don't even understand. And there's such an extraordinary lesson in this. And he basically is a guy, most of you are familiar with him, Saul of Tarsus. His whole job with the religious establishment was to stop the way, which was the movement of Jesus in the first century, tried to end it, persecuted people who were a part of it, was very zealous for the Pharisaical movement. And he was type A, get it done. And then he has this encounter with God, the resurrected Jesus, and he becomes the Apostle Paul. And despite this unbelievable past, everything turns around and he begins to have a new direction for his life. And now, rather than trying to stop the followers of the way and literally persecute them, he becomes the greatest church planner in history. Paul could almost single-handedly be attributed with getting the message of Jesus out of the first century, planted churches all over the Mediterranean rim. His life 180 was unbelievable. And Paul actually starts with identifying the fact that his win for his life comes from his deepest failures, which is unbelievably encouraging to us, because here's the thing for a lot of us, we fall kind of prey to, is whatever has happened in the past, your failure where you haven't gotten it right, that becomes kind of a chain to you, that becomes a hindrance to you to setting a new course and a new win for the future, because you're so consumed with what you haven't done that it keeps you from setting a new course and a new win for the future and what God can do through you and in spite of you despite your past. So here's what Paul says, because his win actually came from his own struggles. He says, "For I'm the least of all the apostles." And again, we kind of brush over this or we think that he's being hyperbolic. He's not. Paul actually felt this. If you study his writings well, all throughout the New Testament, you see this thread of insecurity and this battle with shame and can God despite my past? And so when he says this, he actually means it. I'm the least of all the apostles. Like I barely got in. I mean, if you knew what I did, and I don't even deserve to be called an apostle. I mean, these other guys, they've got a background, a rap sheet too, but it's not mine. And so I've struggled, Paul would say, my entire life feeling worthy, feeling like I even have a chance to set a new course, a new direction, and a new win because I have lost so badly. And I have so much regret, and I love this. But because I persecuted the church of God, but by the grace of God, by God's extraordinary, undeserved, unwarranted, I could never earn it. Why would he give this to me based on what I did? But by the grace of God, I am what I am. Meaning, Paul gets to the place to go, I can't change it. I can't rewind the past. I can't do anything about the lost. I can't take it back. I am what I am. And his grace to me was not without effect. Meaning, God didn't waste his time on me. And the fact that God didn't give up on me, I'm gonna be a steward of that. And despite my past, I'm gonna be worthy of the fact that God didn't give up on me and there is a future that he has for me and there is a win, and I'm not gonna allow my past to define my future. And so I'm gonna work harder than everybody else, and despite what I've done, I'm gonna create a win for the future, and I'm gonna go all out to live my life in that direction. And every single individual, despite your dysfunction or baggage, has that opportunity. In fact, you know this, I mean, many of you, because he decided to do this, he shaped Western civilizations with his writing. He was the guy that took the message of Jesus and explained it to the non-Jewish world and literally almost single-handedly moved the message forward. And so he describes out of that failure what his win is and what it took to get there. And my point is not that you would adopt Paul's win or my win. My point is that you would just recognize what he did, and then I just want to apply it to you. So here's what Paul said out of that failure and in terms of what his win is for the future and what it required of him. He says this in 1 Corinthians, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I've made myself a slave to everyone to do what? To win." Can we try it one more time? To do what? Win. To win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. And basically what he's saying this, because you're like, Paul, you're already Jewish. He's like, no, I know. But my whole goal, because of what I experienced from Christ, because of the fact that he redeemed me, he saved me, he rearranged my past, he didn't undo it, but he used it for the future. Because of what God has done in my life, my win from my life, or one of my wins, is that I would influence as many people as possible to experience what I've experienced. And so to the Jewish people, and I know their customs, but when I'm with them, I go all in because this is the win for my life, meaning I adopt their culture full on. I give up things. I sacrifice things in terms of my own comfort in order to do everything I can to influence and win them with the message that has impacted my life. So he says, to those under the law, I became like those under the law, talking about the Old Testament, Old Covenant law. Even though I'm not under the law, I still practice it anyway just because this is the win for my life to influence people. To those, verse 21, not having the law, I become like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law. Meaning this is all the Gentile, those who are on the outside of the religious system until Jesus shows up. And Paul says, listen, I'm not free of God's law, but now God's law has been summarized in Christ's law. Hopefully The fact that I explain this a lot is helping some of you reinterpret how you see the New Testament. God's law is all the 613 Old Testament commands. It's the 10 commandments. Here's the long list. None of you can measure up to this. And then God comes along, not to negate God's law, but to summarize and clarify God's law into Christ's law, what Jesus came to introduce. And Christ's law is just this: Jesus in the upper room before he's crucified. I want you to love other people the way that God has loved you in Christ. And if you want to love God, the way that you love God is to love other people around you. And the entire law and all of the Old Testament covenant and commands are summarized in that one singular command. And so Paul is like, when I'm with that group, that crew, I adopt that full on so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I become all things to all people so that by all possible means, meaning I have organized my life and my priorities and what I do around this agenda and this win for my future. And I have a past, but my past is not going to define my future so that I might save some. My win, Paul would say, is to win people. But then here, what comes next is where it starts to get practical for us. He says this: do you not know? All of you, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? And all of us know what a race is, but here's Paul's point. That when there's a race, the competition is obvious because the competition is right beside you. If you're, or the competition is right across the line of scrimmage, like that's your competition. Or if it's the Saints, that's your enemy. But whatever, the enemy, the competition, whatever it is. But this is where it is so hard in regard to life, because what you're competing against and for, it's not right beside you. You can't see it in the lane beside you. It's not across the line of scrimmage. I mean, even in gymnastics, you kind of know where you stand because of the person who competed right before you or after you. But there's a scoreboard. There's a scorecard. There's fans cheering you on. You kind of know when you're measuring up. You know when you're getting it right. And you know where you are in relation to the competition. But Paul would say, but in regard to life, it's not obvious. Which is why this is so important. Which is why we lack urgency around it. Because in the things that matter most, there really is no scorecard. Like, I can prioritize my family all day long and make really hard sacrifices. Nobody is throwing me a parade when I pull in the driveway a little bit early. Nobody's patting me on the back. Nobody is celebrating me or you. There's 1,000 decisions that you can make incrementally in the direction of your win that can transform your life and go a decade and not know if you're really winning. Not know if you're, because the scorecard in some cases is so unclear. The scoreboard is so unclear. There's no fans that are cheering you on, which is why, if I can just get personal for a second, which is why some of us have adopted some of the pursuits that we've adopted, and they're not wrong, but they become some of the chief focuses of our life because we are so hungry to win. We're so hungry for a scoreboard. And so the scoreboard for you is the marketplace. And the scoreboard for you is more square footage or another leased car or to get your kid into that school or their achievement. And the tragedy behind all of that is I get why we go in that direction. We're wired that way. But inadvertently, you can adopt a scoreboard that is actually undermining the win that you want at the end of this season. And there is a gap between the decisions and the wins that you create and the payoff of those decisions. And so Paul says, run in such a way that you have defined the win and so that you get the prize. And the prize basically is just the win. Live your life in such a way that you win in the areas that matter most. And there's a bunch that you can't control. It's out of your control. You cannot dictate the future, but you can decide on where you want to end up, and you can live your life in that direction where you pay the price that needs to be paid to prepare yourself to win in the areas that are going to matter most at the end of your life. And I'm telling you, at the end of your life, people have extraordinary clarity about what they should have done. In fact, there's this amazing verse in Psalms that was written by Moses. Most people attribute it to David. It wasn't David. Where Moses says, God, it's actually a prayer. Teach us to number our days so that we could gain a heart of wisdom. And literally what Moses is saying is at the end of our life, we will have extraordinary clarity about what wins we should have lived for. So God, teach me to number my days so practically I can reach into the end of my life and my future and grab that wisdom and bring it into today and live that way right now. to live toward the right wins for my life and for my future. And so Paul goes on to say, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. And they do it to get a crown that's not going to last. So when Paul's talking about this, he's talking about their version of Olympic Games that everybody knew about when he's talking about this, the Isthmian Games. And basically, when you would win at these games, which were a big deal, I mean, everybody knew about them, you would get a crown of laurel leaves. In fact, this is where we get the saying, resting on your laurels, came from this. And so when somebody would get a crown of laurel leaves, everybody knew that it was celebrating past accomplishments, something that they did in the past, because those leaves would wither, they would fade, they didn't last, they didn't endure. And so it's like the equivalent of like the 50-year-old guy who's still reminiscing his 17-year-old high school basketball days. And they're like, that's amazing, congratulations. But it's like, it's kind of a moment in time. Like, it's a past accomplishment. It doesn't mean that much now. All of the leaves have withered and faded. It's not going to endure. And Paul's like, and yet you go into strict training. You give so much time and attention to this. You sacrifice parts of your life for this. And yet it has a really short expiration date. But then he says this, but what we do, what I'm talking about, you should do, how you should live your life, we get a crown that's going to last forever. Therefore, do not run like someone running, what? Aimlessly. And so many people live their life running aimlessly. And they've never defined what they actually want for the future beyond, well, I just want more money and I just want my kids to be happy and successful. That's not a good enough win. I just want to end up in whatever, our dream, and I hope we can travel to. That's not a good enough win. And they're just running aimlessly without ever having really identified the win in the areas of their life that matter most. And they end up chasing the win, or they end up chasing a win that wasn't actually their win until it's too late. And Paul's like, don't live this way. Don't live aimlessly. Don't live without the future defined. Don't live chasing after the wind. Don't fight like a boxer beating the air that's not actually accomplishing anything. No, I strike a blow to my body. This is extreme, but Paul's making a point, and I make it my slave. Basically, Paul, why would you do this? And Paul would say, because despite my past, despite what I did, despite what I can't undo and how people still see me. I mean, Paul would walk into villages for years and he would have to eyeball to eyeball with women who he had overseen the death of their husbands, kids that he had widowed. He would deal with the haunting reminders of that for the rest of his life. But Paul would say, despite what I've done, despite the baggage that I'm carrying, I'm not going to live my life aimlessly any longer. Or like I did in earlier parts of my life, I'm not gonna live my life pursuing the wrong win that eventually I'm gonna regret. Instead, I've identified the win and I don't wanna fall short. And for him, so after I preach to others, I myself would not be disqualified for the prize. His point was this, and then I'll get to us. His point was that I'm gonna prepare and compete as if my competition is lined up beside me or standing in front of me, which is so hard in regard to life. This is why we live aimlessly. This is why we live accidentally adopting other people's wins, giving into cultural majority thinking, feeling the pressure, so we gotta do it, our kids gotta do it. This is what everybody does. Because we don't see what we're actually running the race for. We don't see the competition lined up beside us, and the competition is not another person. It's the will, it's the plan, it's the destiny that God has for your life. And I think Paul would say this. The reason this is important is because you can't wish your way into this. You can't hope your way into this. You can't even pray your way into this. You have to win by preparing to win. And what you see all throughout the New Testament is you win by saying no to you and yes to the things that matter most. Saying no to the immediate that feels so urgent and we got to do it and everybody else is doing it and what's going to happen and we're going to fall behind and I'm going to feel like I haven't achieved enough. You say no to the immediate. You say no to you for the sake of what you want for a future you and the people around you. So here's the question I want to end with. What's your win? Because if you have not identified the win in the areas that matter most, even if you think, your wins are crazy and you wrote an obituary and what's wrong with you, that's fine. Don't do any of that. But I'm just telling you, if you have not identified the win in the areas that matter the most, you don't know if you're winning. What's the win financially? What's the win relationally? What's the win emotionally and what you're pursuing and or what you're allowing into your life? What's the win spiritually? What's the win professionally? What's the win academically in your life or with your kids? And the next question, are you preparing to win? Here's what I'd say to singles. If you look at marriage, and I don't know maybe what you came from or what was modeled for you, but if you have this desire to have a marriage that's unlike a lot of the marriages you see, then you can't date like everybody else. If you want to handle your money in a different kind of way and live generously, and so especially a younger generation, so many people have this idea, then you've got to do some things that maybe nobody else around you is doing. You've got to develop some new wins, or you will adopt the wins of people around you. That wasn't even maybe your win for your life. Or if you're parenting right now and you're kind of in the thick of it, there's some things that you're gonna have to say no to in order to achieve at what matters most, which is parenting those kids in the season. One of the things for Nicole and I that we adopted years ago from a mentor is that we're both kind of driven and again, kind of type A. And so there's multiple times we've pursued things and we'd have to pull back or we'd have to rearrange schedule. And we do this at every season of our life. And so we adopted this phrase for a mentor, no for now, not forever. No for now, not forever. That there's some things that we're going to give up in the season and they may not be right for everybody, but they're right for us because of what we value most in parenting our kids in the season. Even if it means saying no to us, giving up some things, giving up some influence, it's worth it in this season. So whatever it is for you, you have to decide what the win is. And you've got to clarify it and you've got to lean into it. And there's going to be times when it's hard. One of my favorite quotes is from Greg Rochelle where he says this: if you want what everybody else has, do what everybody else does. If you want what few people have, you have to be willing to do what few people do. And this isn't a knock on anybody, but culturally, in debt, over anxious, languishing, feeling a sense of hopelessness is not God's will and design for your life. Which means there may be some wins that you have to create that look a little crazy in this season, and you can't explain them to your mother-in-law, and you might be at odds with your neighbors, and nobody else is doing this, and are we missing out? But if you want what few people have, mark it down. You have to be willing to do what few people are willing to do. And at the risk of sounding overly dramatic, but it's true, you only get one season. Like you only get your 20s once. You only get your 30s once. You only get to parent, and I feel this weight all the time, you only get to parent those kids once, and you're not gonna get it perfectly, but it's a real good, healthy reminder to know you're not getting it back. You're not gonna rewind it. You only get to influence your grandkids one time. You only get one first marriage. I mean, you may have 3 after that, but you're only getting one first one. And the clock is ticking. And either you decide or life will decide for you. Either you decide or cultural majority thinking will decide for you. They will parent your kids and they will ultimately sabotage your time and they will direct your priorities, and you will end up adopting wins that you didn't even want for your life. And I just want to remind you of this. As you do this, it's not just about you. Because when you do this, when you win at the areas that matter most, emotionally, in terms of your health, in regard to your spiritual trajectory, in regard to just who you want to be, your character and how you want to live, it's not just about you. Because when you win, everybody else around you wins. Like this is the thing, if you've met people like this, is that their friends become better. Because I'm a guy, I'm gonna talk to guys for a second. I think we underestimate the amount of influence that we have in certain circles, that when you win in terms of your health and your priorities and what God is calling you to, if you're a follower of Jesus, everybody around you wins, and sometimes they win multi-generationally. It is such a big deal. And so if you're not a Jesus follower, you don't have to do any of this. But it would help you if you did. Just remove the Jesus part and make your own wins. It'll help you. And my hope is that eventually you would actually begin to take Jesus seriously. But if you're a follower of Jesus, this isn't an option. This isn't I should do this, self-help, this will make me better. I'm my best 2025 ever. We have something in common with Paul when he says this, that everyone who competes, most of the people around you to your right and left, in the game of life, they go into strict training and they do it to get a crown. It's not gonna last. Nobody's gonna talk about it at the end. You're not gonna care. Nobody around you is gonna care. And yet so much of your life is defined by that. But if Jesus is right, and by the way, if you predict your own death and resurrection and pull it off, you're right. If Jesus is right, your life is not just bookended by a birth certificate and a death certificate. Paul would say, this is not all there is. That you are living for something bigger and living for something greater. And to rip off Paul's words, do not live your life aimlessly. Don't run like someone running aimlessly. Like, what is your win in the areas that matter most? For some of you spiritually over this next year, you are not gonna pray your way into the relationship with Jesus that you want and how you wanna influence the people around you. You gotta take steps. For some of you, you need to decide what I've been talking about for almost a year. Yes, we're going every week. I'm gonna be in community. I'm gonna show up with the church. I'm gonna begin to plug in. For some of you, you're in a community group. You need to take a step into a community group. Others of you are bored in your community group and you need to take a step into a growth group. When we launch them over the next couple of weeks, it'll be a sacrifice. It's a bigger deal. It's more of a commitment. What do you want? What is the win in terms of your spiritual journey? Because you will not hope and pray your way into it. Or to, again, borrow another line from Paul, do not fight like a boxer who's beating in the air, but it's not actually accomplishing anything. Make your body your slave, which just means this. Paul's like, just adopt the New Testament teaching of let your light shine. Let people see your good works so that they would take interest in your Father in heaven because of the way that you live your life and who you are, because you've identified the wins for the future. And once upon a time, a group of people did just that, and it changed the world. So my question as we end, what's your win? What is your win in the areas that matter most? Financially, relationally, professionally, academically, emotionally, spiritually, because if you haven't defined it in 2025, somebody else will. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm gonna help you with this in a brand new series called Taking Responsibility for Your Life. I don't know what this guy is, but Taking Responsibility for Life, shout out, our graphics teams are amazing. Taking Responsibility for Your Life, a new series, new year is the best time to invite somebody, and this is just what we do as a church because we're a church for the city. And so if you know somebody, a friend, a neighbor, a coworker, this may be exactly what they need. And you have no idea what would happen if you introduced them to a different kind of church. So I want to encourage you to take 30 seconds of courage, everybody, to pray for somebody, invite them, be here next week. But before we get there, you have to decide what is the win in the areas that matter most. Would you guys pray with me? Jesus, thank you so much that you have made the scriptures so incredibly practical, even though we don't feel it sometimes. And that, Lord, you've not given us a life that is purposeless, aimless, random, even though it feels like that. And I just pray for some of us, maybe for the first time or the first time in a long time, that we would actually spend the time to think about the areas that matter most to us and what the win is. And specifically, if we're followers of Jesus, what you are inviting us into. And so God, give us the wisdom to know what to do and give us the courage to actually follow through and do it. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.